Dr. Zara Coleman adjusted her waitress uniform one last time before entering the private dining room of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, Le Bernardin Elite. The Oxford linguistics professor tucked a loose strand of her natural hair under the black headband, her PhD diploma hidden away in a small apartment in Queens, while she worked 3 jobs to pay off her mother's mounting medical bills. At 32, Zara spoke 7 languages fluently: English, French, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, German, and her native Yoruba. She had spent the last 8 years teaching at prestigious universities across Europe before returning to New York when her mother was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. The treatments weren't covered by insurance, and the bills had reached $400,000. Tonight, she would be serving Manhattan's wealthiest tech moguls at their monthly Innovation Summit dinner. Men who controlled billions of dollars while she earned $12 an hour plus tips, desperately trying to save the woman who had sacrificed everything to give her an education. "Table 7 is ready for service," called Maria, the head waitress, her voice tense. "And Zara, be careful tonight. These men are particularly demanding." As Zara walked through the ornate dining room, carrying a silver tray with the evening's first course, she mentally reviewed her strategy. Stay invisible, serve efficiently, collect the money, get home to her mother. What she didn't know was that Table 7 was about to test every ounce of dignity she had left. The private dining room sparkled with crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed walls. 8 men in $1,000 suits sat around a mahogany table, their voices filling the air with discussions of stock prices and hostile takeovers. "Gentlemen," announced the evening's host, Marcus Sterling, CEO of Sterling Tech Industries and worth approximately $3.2 billion. "Before we discuss the quantum computing acquisition, let's enjoy Chef Laurent's exceptional menu." Zara entered quietly, beginning to serve the appetizers with practiced precision. Her movements were graceful, efficient, nearly invisible, exactly as she had trained herself to be. "Excuse me," she said softly to the man closest to her, her slight Nigerian accent barely noticeable. "The lobster bisque, sir?" The man looked up with an expression of mild annoyance. It was David Richardson, founder of Richardson Holdings, known for his hostile business practices and even more hostile personality. "What did you just say?" Richardson asked loudly, causing the other conversations to pause. "The lobster bisque, sir," Zara repeated, her voice steady despite the sudden attention. Richardson turned to his colleagues with an exaggerated expression of confusion. "Gentlemen, I think we need a translator. Can anyone understand what our help is trying to communicate?" Laughter erupted around the table. Marcus Sterling leaned back in his chair, savoring the moment. "David, be nice," Sterling said with mock concern. "I'm sure she's trying her best. It's not her fault English isn't her first language." "Actually," Richardson continued, warming to his audience, "maybe we should order in her native language. What would that be? Clicking sounds?" The laughter grew louder. Zara stood motionless, the silver tray steady in her hands, her face a mask of professional composure. Inside, she felt the familiar burn of humiliation she had hoped to leave behind in her academic career. "Perhaps we need subtitles," added Jonathan Hayes, CTO of Hayes Innovations, "or Google Translate for the dining experience." "Honestly," said Thomas Bradford, investment banker and old money aristocrat, "where do they find these people? This is Le Bernardin Elite, not some diner in wherever she's from." Zara placed the bowl gently in front of Richardson, her hands completely steady. "Will there be anything else, sir?" "Yes," Richardson said, making no effort to lower his voice. "Next time, could you speak slowly? And maybe practice your pronunciation? This is a business dinner, not amateur hour at the UN." The men at the table exploded in laughter again. Several pulled out their phones to record what they clearly considered entertainment. "You know what?" Sterling added. "Maybe you could teach us some of your language. What's the word for tip in your country? Because the quality of service we're getting." He left the sentence hanging, but the implication was clear. Zara completed her service without another word, her dignity intact despite the verbal assault. As she turned to leave, she heard Richardson's final comment. These people need to understand that in America, we speak English. Real English, not whatever that was. What none of these powerful men knew was that they had just humiliated one of the world's leading experts in applied linguistics. Dr. Zara Coleman had published 17 papers on language acquisition, spoke more languages than all of them combined, and was about to remind them that intelligence isn't measured by accent or skin color. But first, she had to finish her shift. An hour later, as Zara was serving the main course, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. She glanced at it discreetly. It was from Mount Sinai Hospital about her mother's condition. "Excusez-moi a moment," she whispered in perfect French while stepping aside to read the message. Dr. Martinez had called an emergency consultation. Zara's mother had taken a turn for the worse, and they needed to discuss immediate treatment options that would cost another $150,000. Her hands trembling slightly, Zara typed a quick response in Spanish to Dr. Martinez, who was bilingual. "Llegaré tan pronto como pueda. Por favor, hagan todo lo posible." She was so focused on the message that she didn't notice the conversation at table 7 had stopped completely. Did she just speak French?" whispered Hayes. "And Spanish," added Bradford, his tone no longer mocking. Sterling held up his hand for silence, his eyes fixed on Zara as she continued typing on her phone. When her phone rang a moment later, she answered in fluent Mandarin. "Wo xian zai zai gong zuo. Women nang wandian tan hua ma." The silence at the table was deafening. When she hung up and turned back to them, 8 of Manhattan's most powerful men were staring at her with expressions ranging from confusion to dawning realization. "I apologize for the interruption, gentlemen," Zara said, her English now noticeably more crisp and academic than before. "Is there anything else I can bring you this evening?" Richardson cleared his throat, his earlier confidence evaporating. How many languages did you just speak?" 3, Zara replied simply. "French, Spanish, and Mandarin. Is there something you need assistance with?" The power dynamic in the room had shifted so dramatically that several of the men looked uncomfortable for the first time in years. Where did you learn to speak like that?" Sterling asked, his voice lacking its previous arrogance. Zara set down her serving tray and looked directly at him. For the first time that evening, she was no longer trying to be invisible. "Oxford University," she said quietly, "where I earned my doctorate in applied linguistics with a specialization in cross-cultural communication." The revelation hit the table like a shockwave. Several of the men exchanged glances, suddenly aware that their entertainment had backfired spectacularly. You have a PhD?" Hayes asked weakly. 2, actually, Zara replied, her voice gaining strength. "Applied linguistics from Oxford and cognitive psychology from the Sorbonne. I also hold master's degrees in international relations and comparative literature." She paused, letting the information sink in. "I speak 7 languages fluently: English, French, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, German, and Yoruba, my native tongue. I've published 17 peer-reviewed papers on language acquisition and cultural linguistics, and I've lectured at universities in 12 countries." The silence was so complete that the only sound was the distant clinking of dishes from the main dining room. Bradford, who had made the comment about "wherever she's from," looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. "Then why?" Richardson began, then stopped, realizing how the question would sound. "Why am I working as a waitress?" Zara finished for him. "Because my mother has stage 4 cancer, and her treatment costs $400,000. Because even with a PhD from Oxford, student loans for 2 doctoral degrees don't pay themselves. Because sometimes life forces you to choose between your career and your family." She walked closer to the table, no longer the subservient server, but an educator addressing particularly slow students. "But mostly I'm here because I believe honest work has dignity, regardless of what ignorant people might think about accents or backgrounds." Hayes's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his face went pale. "What is it?" Sterling asked. It's a Google search," Hayes whispered. "Dr. Zara Coleman. She's famous. She won the International Linguistics Achievement Award last year. She's consulted for the UN, the World Bank. He kept scrolling, his voice getting quieter with each discovery. She speaks at conferences around the world. She's written books. She's brilliant. The other men began frantically searching on their phones, each discovery making their earlier behavior more inexcusable. Dr. Coleman, Sterling said finally, his voice completely different from the mocking tone he'd used earlier. We had no idea. Of course you didn't, Zara replied calmly. Because you heard my accent and decided you knew everything about me. You saw my skin color and assumed I was less intelligent. You never bothered to ask questions because you were too busy being entertained by your own prejudices. Richardson, who had been the cruelest in his mockery, was scrolling through articles about Zara's academic achievements. His face had gone from red with laughter to pale with humiliation. Dr. Coleman, he said hesitantly, your research on linguistic prejudice and its impact on economic opportunities. I've read your papers. We just proved your thesis. Zara nodded slowly. Article 847 in the Journal of Applied Sociolinguistics. How Accent Discrimination Perpetuates Economic Inequality. A 5-year study. I interviewed over 3,000 professionals who experienced workplace discrimination based solely on their speech patterns. She gestured around the table. Congratulations, gentlemen. You've just provided me with an excellent case study for my next paper. Thomas Bradford, the investment banker who had questioned where they find these people, put down his phone with shaking hands. Dr. Coleman, your work on multilingual cognitive advantages. We use your research at our international investment firm. You've influenced how we approach global communications. I'm aware, Zara replied. Your company licensed my translation protocols 2 years ago, the same protocols you just mocked as amateur hour at the UN. The irony was crushing. These men had spent millions implementing her research while simultaneously humiliating her for the very expertise they had purchased. Hayes, the CTO, looked up from his phone. Your artificial intelligence language model. It's what powers our customer service systems in 40 countries. Yes, Zara said simply. And tonight you demonstrated exactly why that model was necessary, to overcome human bias in cross-cultural communication. Sterling, who had started the evening as the most arrogant, now looked genuinely shaken. Dr. Coleman, is there anything we can do to apologize for our behavior? Zara considered the question carefully. Around the table, 8 of the most powerful men in Manhattan waited for her response like chastened schoolchildren. You want to apologize? She asked. Then learn from this. Every person serving you, cleaning for you, or working in any capacity you consider beneath you has a story. They have intelligence, dreams, struggles, and dignity that your money can't buy and your prejudices can't erase. She paused, looking at each man individually. You spent this evening mocking my accent while I served you dinner to pay for my mother's cancer treatment. What does that say about your character versus mine? The men sat in stunned silence, the weight of their behavior settling over them like a heavy blanket. Their expensive suits and billion-dollar portfolios couldn't protect them from the realization that they had revealed themselves to be small, petty people. Dr. Coleman, Sterling said finally, you mentioned your mother's medical bills. How much does she need? Zara studied his face, looking for signs of the patronizing charity she had encountered so often. This isn't about charity, Mr. Sterling, she said firmly. This is about recognition that intelligence and worth aren't determined by circumstances or appearance. I understand that, Sterling replied, his voice sincere for the first time that evening. But if you'll allow me, my foundation focuses on supporting brilliant minds who've been overlooked by traditional systems. What you've accomplished academically while working multiple jobs is extraordinary. Hayes cleared his throat. Dr. Coleman, my company's diversity and inclusion program needs a complete overhaul. Would you consider consulting for us? Our international expansion requires someone with your linguistic expertise, added Bradford. We've been looking for the right consultant for months. Richardson, who had been the most vicious in his mockery, spoke last. Dr. Coleman, I own 17 companies across 4 continents. Every one of them needs cultural sensitivity training. Would you be willing to develop and lead those programs?" Zara looked around the table, seeing not the arrogant billionaires who had humiliated her an hour earlier, but men who had been forced to confront their own prejudices and found themselves wanting. "Gentlemen," she said slowly, "if you're serious about changing how you treat people, then yes. But this isn't about making you feel better about tonight. This is about creating real change." Sterling nodded. "Name your terms." "First, my mother's treatment gets the best care money can buy, but as an advance on consulting fees, not charity. Second, every program I develop gets implemented across all your companies, not just the ones you think need it. Third, you hire and promote based on merit, not appearance or accent." "And fourth?" Hayes asked. Zara smiled, the first genuine smile of the evening. "You never mock another service worker again, because you never know who might be serving you dinner." As the evening progressed, the transformation in the room was remarkable. The men who had started dinner as cruel entertainers now listened intently as Zara explained the psychological impact of linguistic discrimination. "When you mock someone's accent," she said, "you're not just attacking their speech, you're attacking their identity, their history, their family's journey. My accent carries the story of my grandmother who spoke Yoruba to me as a child, and my education in 3 different countries." Richardson had stopped eating entirely, absorbed in the lesson he was receiving. "Dr. Coleman, in your research, how often do highly qualified individuals face this kind of treatment?" "Every day," Zara replied. "I interviewed brilliant scientists, doctors, engineers, and professors who regularly face discrimination based solely on how they speak English. The economic cost of this prejudice is staggering, billions of dollars in lost productivity and innovation." She pulled out her phone and showed them a presentation she had given at the World Economic Forum. This slide shows the correlation between accent discrimination and brain drain in international companies. When talented individuals are marginalized because of their speech patterns, they often leave for more inclusive environments. Sterling studied the data with the intensity he usually reserved for quarterly reports. "This suggests our companies are hemorrhaging talent because of biases we didn't even realize we had." "Exactly," Zara confirmed, "and tonight you demonstrated those biases perfectly. You assumed I was less intelligent, less educated, less valuable because of my accent. How many brilliant minds have you dismissed with similar assumptions?" The question hung in the air like an indictment. Bradford spoke up hesitantly. "Dr. Coleman, if we've been unconsciously discriminating based on accents, how do we fix that in our hiring and promotion processes?" Zara's expression softened slightly. This was the first time one of them had asked about solutions rather than making excuses. "You start by recognizing that accent and intelligence are completely unrelated," she said. "Some of the most brilliant minds I know speak English as a second, third, or fourth language. Their accents represent linguistic versatility, not deficiency." Hayes looked up from his phone, where he had been reading more of Zara's published research. "Dr. Coleman, your paper on multilingual advantages in corporate innovation states that multilingual employees demonstrate 47% higher creative problem-solving abilities. Is that accurate?" "Conservative, actually," Zara replied. "My latest research shows the figure is closer to 62% in tech industries specifically." The implication hit the table like a physical force. These men, who prized innovation above all else, had been systematically excluding the most innovative minds from their companies. "Jesus," whispered Sterling, "how many brilliant people have we rejected because they didn't sound like us?" "Or," added Richardson grimly, "how many are working as waitresses because we're too prejudiced to recognize their worth?" Zara nodded. "That's the trillion-dollar question, isn't it? How much innovation has been lost because brilliant minds were serving your dinner instead of sitting at your boardroom tables?" Thomas Bradford, who came from old money and had never questioned his advantages, looked genuinely shaken. "Dr. Coleman, you could have humiliated us publicly, You could have recorded our behavior, posted it online, destroyed our reputations. Why didn't you? Zara considered the question carefully before answering. Because destruction isn't the goal. Education is. You're not evil men. You're privileged men who had never been forced to examine your biases. Tonight gave you that chance. She gestured around the table. Each of you controls thousands of jobs, influences countless careers, shapes entire industries. If you learn from tonight and change how you operate, the positive impact could be enormous. And if we don't, Hayes asked quietly, then you'll continue to be exactly what you were an hour ago. Powerful men who mistake prejudice for insight and cruelty for humor. The words carried weight because they were delivered without anger, just stated as fact. Sterling put down his phone and looked directly at Zara. Dr. Coleman, I want to make you an offer, not just consulting work, but a permanent position. Chief Diversity and Innovation Officer for Sterling Tech Industries, full autonomy to redesign our hiring, promotion, and corporate culture practices. With what authority? Zara asked. Complete authority, board-level position. You'd report directly to me and have veto power over any hiring or promotion decision that you believe reflects unconscious bias. The other men around the table looked surprised by the scope of Sterling's offer. Richardson leaned forward. Marcus, that's giving her enormous power over your company's personnel decisions. Good, Sterling replied without hesitation, because clearly our current personnel decisions have been terrible. Dr. Coleman has the expertise to fix what we've broken. Hayes nodded slowly. Dr. Coleman, would you consider similar positions at our companies? We could form a consortium, share best practices, coordinate training programs. Create a network of truly inclusive corporations, added Bradford, led by someone who understands the real cost of prejudice. Zara looked around the table, seeing the potential for genuine change. Gentlemen, if you're serious about this, then yes, but understand, real change is uncomfortable. It means acknowledging that you've been wrong about fundamental assumptions. It means promoting people who don't look or sound like you. It means listening to perspectives you've never considered. Are you willing to be that uncomfortable? She asked. One by one, the men nodded. Then let's begin, Zara said. 6 months later, Dr. Zara Coleman sat in her corner office on the 47th floor of Sterling Tower, overlooking Manhattan. Her mother's cancer was in remission thanks to the experimental treatment that had become affordable when Zara accepted her new role. The diversity initiatives she had implemented across the consortium of companies had resulted in a 340% increase in multilingual hires and an 89% increase in diverse hires, improvement in employee satisfaction scores among minority workers. More importantly, the companies were seeing unprecedented innovation. Teams that reflected linguistic and cultural diversity were outperforming homogeneous groups by significant margins. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richardson. Dr. Coleman, our quarterly innovation metrics just came in. 127% increase in patent applications, 89% increase in successful product launches. Your programs are revolutionizing how we do business. A knock on her door interrupted her reading. It was Sterling, holding a stack of financial reports. Zara, have you seen these numbers? Every company in our consortium is outperforming projections. The Wall Street Journal wants to do a cover story on how linguistic diversity transformed our corporate culture. Zara smiled, remembering the man who had mocked her accent just months earlier. Marcus, do you remember what you said that night at Le Bernardin about needing subtitles for my English? Sterling winced visibly. I was an ignorant ass. How do you ever forgive behavior like that? By seeing it as a teaching moment, Zara replied. You weren't inherently evil, you were just uninformed. The difference is that you were willing to learn. And now? Now you're proof that people can change, that prejudice can be overcome with education and humility. Sterling nodded, then hesitated at the door. Zara, there's something else. Le Bernardin Elite called. They want to host a diversity and inclusion dinner with you as the keynote speaker. The same private dining room where you humiliated me, Zara finished with a smile. I think that would be perfect. That evening, Zara returned to Le Bernardin Elite, not as a waitress, but as the guest of honor. The same private dining room that had witnessed her humiliation now hosted 50 of Manhattan's most powerful executives, all there to learn from her expertise. She wore an elegant dress instead of a uniform, spoke from a podium instead of serving from a tray, and commanded respect instead of enduring mockery. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her slight Nigerian accent now a source of pride rather than shame. "Tonight I want to tell you about the hidden cost of prejudice and the extraordinary value of inclusion." As she spoke, weaving seamlessly between English, French, and Spanish to demonstrate her points, the audience listened with rapt attention. In the back of the room, Marcus Sterling watched with genuine admiration. The woman they had tried to humiliate had instead taught them the most valuable lesson of their careers. "True intelligence," Zara concluded, "isn't measured by how you sound when you speak. It's measured by how you listen when others speak and how you respond when you realize you've been wrong." The standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes. Later, as the evening wound down, Richardson approached her. "Dr. Coleman, I owe you an apology that's 6 months overdue. What I said that night was inexcusable." "David," Zara replied warmly, "you already apologized through your actions. Your companies now have the most inclusive hiring practices in your industry. That means more than any words could. But how do you move past that kind of humiliation?" Zara smiled, the same genuine smile that had marked her transformation that night. "By remembering that every humiliation is an opportunity to prove who you really are. You tried to make me smaller, but instead, you gave me the chance to show my true size." "And what size is that?" "Large enough to transform an entire industry, fluent enough to speak to the world, and gracious enough to forgive the men who underestimated me." As she left the restaurant that night, Zara reflected on the journey from humiliation to triumph. Her accent hadn't changed, her skin color hadn't changed, but everything else had transformed completely. The waitress who had been mocked for her English now shaped corporate culture across multiple industries. The woman they had dismissed as help now helped shape the future of business itself, and most importantly, she had proven that true power doesn't come from putting others down. It comes from lifting everyone up. The little girl from Nigeria who had dreamed of changing the world had done exactly that. One conversation, one company, one prejudice at a time. If this story of dignity, perseverance, and transformation touched your heart, remember that everyone deserves respect, regardless of how they speak, where they come from, or what job they hold. Subscribe for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity and the power of looking beyond first impressions.